Hey everyone, tonight we are going to embark on a raw, unfiltered journey of survival, marooned in rainforest after helicopter crash. In this story, I'll walk you through every pulse-pounding moment, from the first gut-wrenching impact to the triumphant lift into rescue skies. You'll hear the snap of splintering metal, feel the cold sting of rain on bruised skin, and witness the battle between despair and determination deep in a foreign jungle. So before we get started, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can keep making better videos. Now enjoy a cup of hot tea and let's embark on this journey together tonight. I remember the moment the world shook apart beneath me. 1 second, the helicopter's rotors sang their steady hum. The next, a deafening crack split the air. I didn't have time to think gravity seized me, flinging me against a hard surface that tore breath from my lungs. My vision exploded in a burst of light and shadow as the rotor blades slammed into the canopy above shredding leaves like paper. Then came the snap, the sound of metal bending and bones jarring. The chopper dove, tumbling end over end, and I was pinned to the floor, the scent of hydraulic fluid and burning wires choking me. Everything went black. When I pried my eyes open, there was no safety net of instrument panels or smooth metal flooring. Instead, jagged steel protruded at odd angles, and humid air thick with the smell of wet earth pressed in on me. I could hear the hellish creak of the wreck settling high up in the trees. My heart pounded so hard, it felt like it might burst through my chest. Instinct screamed at me to move to flee, but pain gripped my limbs. My shoulders screamed with every breath. Panic rose in my throat. If I sat here, I would burn or drown if the wreckage gave way. I forced myself to inhale, tasting copper blood. Rolling to one side, I felt the wet crunch of broken canopy. Beneath me, leaves and twigs pressing into my cheek. Through the twisted steel, I could see gaps of sky iron, gray foreboding. Adrenaline kicked in. I tested my fingers, numb but moving. I scraped my knuckles against a shard of metal, drawing a fresh cut. A white-hot jolt shot down my arm, but I ignored it. Survival didn't wait for healing. With a grunt, I hauled myself upright. The wreck rocked ominously. I kicked away loose panels, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Floating in my peripheral vision was the twisted fuselage barely hanging off a tangle of vines. Beyond the rainforest stretched into infinity, towering trunks disappearing into mist. The distant roar of a waterfall, or my mind tricking me. Pain and fear threaded together as I found a twisted support strut and swung my legs over the side. My boots scraped against metal flanges. Each movement sparked agony through my hip and ribs. But I could not stay. Somewhere below the forest floor waited no gentle landing, but a harsh embrace of branches and rocks. I chose a point where broken floorboards jutted out, bracing myself against the wreck's edge. Counting down, I exhaled and leapt. Time slowed. I squeezed my eyes shut as branches whipped past, tearing at my clothes and skin. My arms flailed, seeking purchase in the greenery, snapping twigs. Then a final drop, and I hit the ground in a spray of dirt rock and underbrush. Everything ached. My helmet lay shattered. Vision blurred. I blinked away, spots of red dancing in my sight. I lay still, gasping, grateful to be on solid ground. The chopper's skeleton towered above me, an alien carcass in the vibrant chaos of green. It was only once the wreckage stilled, settling into silence, that the reality hit. I was utterly alone. No radio signal, no pilot's voice, just the roar of insects and the whisper of leaves. My pulse thundered in my ears as I rolled onto my side, facing that twisted hulk. Between ragged breaths, I realized my survival would begin here on this precarious ledge, between life and oblivion. Light filtered through the canopy in fractured shards dappling the wreckage, with lazy patterns that seemed almost serene against the chaos. I blinked against the brilliance, my head pounding like a drum inside my skull. Every breath felt thick and heavy, as though the humid air itself fought to choke me. My vision swam, and I pressed a shaking hand to my brow, surprised by how warm and sticky it felt. I lifted my arm and winced at the sight of dark stains spreading across my sleeve. Blood, I realized. I must have banged my head during the fall. I pushed myself up on one elbow, grimacing as pain radiated through my shoulder. My muscles protested, but I forced another movement. The wreck's skeleton groaned behind me, and a vine creaked free, swinging toward me like a pendulum. I flinched and pressed my back against the jagged metal. For a moment, I simply stayed still, letting adrenaline snake through my veins, amplifying every sound: insects buzzing, leaves rustling, a distant bird call that sounded like a melancholy whistle. My heart thundered in my chest, and I counted its beats, 1, 2, 3, trying to steady myself. The forest around me felt alive. Huge buttress roots twisted around fallen logs. Ferns unfurled their delicate fronds. Vines dripped moisture onto the forest floor. Everything was green, so green that it seemed almost unreal. I tried to recall where the rotor blades had lost altitude, but my memory remained a blank. I didn't know how long I'd been unconscious. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. I slid off the wreck's fragment and onto damp earth. The ground was soft in places, a yielding mattress of decaying leaves and mud. I gingerly pressed my weight onto my left leg. Pain shot through my hip, but it held. I had to inventory my condition. I drew a ragged breath, closing my eyes as pain lanced across my ribs. When I turned, I touched my side, a deep bruise spreading beneath the fabric of my shirt. Each rib felt tender, as though a fist had punched me repeatedly. I exhaled slowly. Broken ribs could puncture lungs. I needed to know if I could still breathe deeply. I inhaled, then exhaled, each breath sharp but manageable. Kneeling, I leaned forward and shifted my gaze over my arms. Scrapes coated both forearms' twigs, and sharp leaves had left faint scratches that stung like fire. My right hand trembled as I examined my fingers. One cut over my knuckle oozed slowly. Another streaked across my palm, red and angry. I bit my lip against the taste of metal that flicked through my senses. I needed to stop the bleeding. I tore a strip of cloth from the hem of my shirt, an old travel tee now ragged, and wrapped it around my palm, knotting it tight. Blood seeped through, but the pressure slowed the flow. I stood dark shapes dancing at the edges of my vision. The trees towered above me, their sprawling branches like the arms of sentinels. The air was thick every breath, tasting of damp earth and rotting wood. A single drop of rain pattered onto my head, then another, then a slow curtain of droplets began to fall. I glanced up. The sky was hidden behind a dense weave of foliage, but I could tell the day was waning. The jungle light had a dim, almost claustrophobic quality. I had no idea where I was. Was this a surveyed stretch of rainforest, or deep in some uncharted wild? The GPS on my wrist display lay useless under its cracked glass. My radio transceiver, once clipped to my belt, dangled broken antenna, twisted at a grotesque angle. There would be no immediate contact with civilization. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. To focus, I shifted my attention to immediate needs: shelter, water, fire signal. But first, more urgent orientation. I needed reference points. I had to know where up was, literally. I looked around for higher ground. The thickets here were thick. Progress would be slow. Then I noticed a moss-covered stone to my left, about 3 feet tall, perched at a gentle incline. It might offer a slightly better vantage, or at least a dry place to rest. I gathered the tattered fabric of my shirt, knelt and eased myself forward, bracing my weight on the stone's smooth surface. Once seated, I took stock of my pack. It lay a few paces away, under a low-hanging vine. I favored my good arm and crept toward it, limbs stiff. The pack was heavy, and I gritted my teeth as I lifted it onto my lap. My fingers brushed the buckle, and I exhaled in relief as I heard it click open. Tools. A small first aid kit dangled at the top, a blessing. Carefully, I removed the antiseptic wipes, gauze pads, and adhesive tape. With deliberate calm, I cleaned the cut on my knuckle, wincing at the sting of alcohol. I applied a pad, wrapped the tape around, and secured it. Next, I dabbed at the scrape on my palm, then placed several strips of gauze over the cut on my side. The kit's bandages offered minimal cushioning, but better than nothing. I then unzipped another compartment. Inside lay my utility knife compass and a tiny ferrocerium rod. My pulse slowed as I realized the value of these items. The knife's edge was still keen. The compass needle quivered slightly northward, and the ferro rod ignition without matches. My pack also held a small aluminum bottle. I shook it and heard liquid sloshing. Water. I had no idea when I'd last drunk, but I knew dehydration would kill faster than my other injuries. A crack of thunder rolled through the trees. The rain intensified, drawing a fine mist around me. I closed my eyes and let the sounds wash over me, rain tapping on leaves. The rumble of distant thunder, my own ragged breathing. For a moment, I feared the storm might wash away my tracks or drown the wreck in mud. But the rain also had a purpose. It could refill my bottle and bathe my wounds. I held the bottle open and let the rainwater pool inside. The liquid tumbled into the aluminum with a metallic hiss. I capped it and took a measured sip, tepid, pulpy, with algae and detritus, but life-giving. I sat on that mossy stone, letting the cold water trickle down my throat, feeling its promise of survival. Even as the storm drummed around me, my mind ticked through options. I needed to get clear of the wreck before it slid further from the shifting vines above. I needed shelter before night fully descended. I needed to move, but cautiously. Every step was a risk, a twisted ankle, a sudden drop-off, a hidden snake. I closed my eyes briefly and pictured my camp on the ridge, steady traffic-friendly voices. The contrast of that memory cut deep, but shadows lurked even in familiar places. Here at least my choices belonged solely to me. I exhaled and rose the rainwater dripping from my hair in slow rivulets. The forest waited silent, watchful, indifferent. I tucked the compass into my pocket and slung the pack across my chest, one foot in front of the other. I pressed forward toward the unknown, focusing on each step, each breath, each heartbeat. The world blurred around me, but I held on to myself, limbs battered, spirit unbroken. The ground beneath me was a soggy carpet of leaves, slick with rain and stained with traces of blood mine and the helicopters. I paused under a massive kapok tree, its swollen roots twisting like ancient serpents around the forest floor. Here, out of the worst of the downpour, I could see clearly the extent of my injuries. My shirt, shredded at the hem, clung to my torso with dark, damp patches. My left forearm throbbed where a jagged piece of metal from the rotor assembly had grazed me, slashing through fabric and skin. Another deep gouge on my thigh stung every time I shifted my weight. If infection set in, I'd lose more than mobility. I dropped my pack to the ground, water pooling around its base. Drawing my utility knife, I slit open the small first aid kit I'd scavenged. The antiseptic wipes were already damp, but they still stung when I wiped them across the cuts. I bit down on the inside of my cheek to keep from crying out. The antiseptic hissed as it met fresh blood. A wave of nausea threatened, but I steadied myself against the kapok's trunk and inhaled deeply of the earthy, rain-cooled air. Next, I needed sturdy bandages. The gauze pads I had were too small for the gash on my forearm. My fingers trembled as I peeled apart layers of gauze, but even doubling them left bare edges. I needed reinforcement. My gaze flicked to a nearby shard of salvaged metal, an aluminum panel, twisted and sharp-edged with jagged rainwater trickling down its surface. Carefully, I pried it loose from the wreckage, using my knife to lever it free. A sliver of metal about 6 inches long surfaced from the mud. Its edge was smooth on one side and brutally sharp on the other. I tucked it into my belt for now. From the wreckage, I retrieved another strip of cloth, a fragment of the co-pilot's seat cushion. The foam was saturated, but still offered a slight cushion. I wrapped the cushion material over the gash, then placed a gauze pad on top, and finally bound it all in a wide cloth strip torn from my shirt. The makeshift pack pressed firmly around my forearm stem to wrist. I tested it with a flex. Blood welled but did not gush. Enough to hold. The dull roar of the rain drilled in my ears as I tied a knot and folded the ends of the cloth to prevent slippage. Attention shifted to my thigh. I crouched on one knee, lifting my pant leg to reveal the scratch, long, ragged, and still dripping. The wound was deep enough that I could see pale muscle beneath. My heart clenched with the thought of exposure to jungle pathogens. I dipped a clean gauze square into the aluminum bottle of rainwater I'd collected and pressed it to the wound. The cold water washed away mud and twigs, leaving the cut raw. With trembling hands, I applied antiseptic, then pressed fresh gauze pads into place. But on my thigh, gravity worked against me. I needed a splint or something to keep the bandage snug. That's when the metal splinter I'd secured in my belt came to mind. I slipped it out and pressed it lengthwise against the upper edge of the wound. Its rigidity would compress the gauze from above. Holding it in place, I wrapped the cloth strip around thigh metal and gauze in a spiral, gradually working downward. The metal's cool surface bit into my skin, but I wove the cloth more tightly until the bandage no longer shifted. I tapped the edge and tested the pressure good. No pooling blood, at least for now. As I straightened, a sharp pain lanced through my side. One of the ribs bruised or cracked from the crash made itself known. Leaning against the kapok's trunk, I took measured breaths, focusing on exhaling slowly. My shirt's hem had torn away earlier, leaving my waist bare. I unfastened the top of my pack, removed a length of climbing cord, unused since departure, and tied it gently around my chest just under the armpits. The cord was thin but strong. Used as a makeshift rib binder, it reduced the painful expansion of my chest when breathing. It made each inhalation feel tighter, but pain reduced by half. I wiped sweat and rain from my brow. My breathing steadied. The cord held firm. Checking my other arm, I found only scrapes painful, but survivable. I tore small gauze from the kit and covered each minor cut, taping them in place. With that done, I took stock of my remaining supplies. A couple of antiseptic packets, some adhesive tape, 2 small gauze pads. Nothing else. I couldn't afford to waste a single piece of bandage. Rain slowed to a gentle patter. I shivered in the cooling air, but kept moving. Infection was one enemy, hypothermia another. My clothes were soaked. I draped the torn remains of my shirt over my legs while bandaging, helping retain warmth. My spine hummed with aches. It wasn't just the physical. A constant red mist of fear and doubt clouded my mind. But with each bandage, each measured breath, I wrestled control back from panic. Next came finding clean water for future cleaning and hydration. But that could wait a moment. First aid came before anything. I needed to ensure my bleeding was contained. I knelt again and tested my makeshift bandages with gentle pulls. The forearm wrap held tight. The thigh compress remained firm. The chest binder eased pain without cutting off circulation. My ribcage protested, but I felt steadier. A faint chirp caught my attention. Out in the clearing, the wreck's weak electrical system pulsed. An emergency beacon light flickered on the tail, watering its flickering red glow through the leaves. It was intermittent, but every 10 seconds, a flash of red pierced the gloom. The beacon's battery wouldn't last long without repair, but even that tiny pulse offered hope. Somewhere beyond this jungle, a search party might catch that blink. I rose to my feet, slowly, carefully testing each limb. My muscles trembled but held. I knelt to retrieve the beacon's control box from deeper in the tangle, using my now clean forefinger to press the small reset button. The pulses sped up steady now every 5 seconds, a brighter beacon of my existence. I wrapped a piece of cling wrap over the electronics, sealing them against more rain. With the emergency light streaming, my confidence grew. First aid had given me time. I could move without crimson trails marking every footstep. Pain still gnawed at me, but it no longer overwhelmed every thought. I adjusted my pack straps, tightened the chest cord again, and secured the knife in its sheath. My heart slowed to a calmer rhythm, still racing, but tempered by purpose. Survival, I reminded myself, was a series of small victories: a cleaned wound, a bandage that holds a working beacon. Stepping away from the kapok tree, I ran a hand through my dripping hair and surveyed the surrounding jungle. The forest floor sloped gently downward toward a murmur of water, the promise of a stream. But before heading into the unknown again, I took one more moment to center myself. I clasped my bleeding arm against my chest, binder, pulled my pack straps to redistribute weight, and exhaled. The water, the shelter, the next step, all lay ahead. For now, I had to trust my own ingenuity and what little gear remained. With first aid improvised, I could think beyond the immediate. The forest still loomed unforgiving and vast, but it no longer felt like a trap I was walking into blindly. I had stitched myself back together. Now it was time to take the next move. The forest floor pulsed with hidden threats: slippery mud, tangled roots, scuttling insects, and fanged creatures lurking just beyond sight. My makeshift bandages held, but every misstep could reopen wounds or invite infection. I needed a vantage point, a refuge above the chaos. I scanned the towering trunks, searching for a climbable tree. One stood out a towering kapok cousin, its bark rough and fissured vines coiling around its base like braided ropes. Its lower branches arced upward at waist height, offering an initial grip. I approached cautiously, minding the ground. As I neared, a rustle in the underbrush made me freeze, tiny tails flicking a troop of monkeys darting away into the canopy. Their alarmed chatter echoed overhead, warning me of something unseen. I swallowed hard and turned back to the tree. If monkeys felt uneasy, perhaps predators lurked nearby. My heartbeat accelerated, and I locked eyes on that first sturdy limb. Gripping the vine like a rope ladder, I hoisted myself up. The wet fibers slipped under my weight, so I wedged my knife into a crevice in the bark for extra purchase. My good arm arched above me, muscles strained as I hauled my body upward. Each inch gained brought fresh burns in my shoulder and thigh, but adrenaline poured through my veins, dulling the worst of it. Higher up, the branches thickened. I found a Y-shaped fork about 15 feet off the ground, where two limbs provided a natural seat. Settling there, I braced my feet against the trunk, pushing until my thighs held me in place. I exhaled a shaky breath, shaking rainwater and sweat from my hair as droplets fell to the forest floor below. From this height, the roar of nearby water sounded muted, a distant heartbeat. The cacophony of insects, frogs, and unseen creatures felt softer, tamed by distance. My injuries throbbed anew with every shift, but within the leafy cradle I could pause. I surveyed the wreck below. The emergency beacon's red flashes flickered through the foliage in a steady rhythm. I traced the thin column of its pulsed light marking direction. Beyond, the rainforest spread in layers of green, rising and falling like an endless sea. The canopy formed a living roof, leaves woven so thickly that the sky was a mere rumor, From this vantage, I could also spot possible routes for descent and travel. A faint line of lighter green, perhaps a narrow path or stream bank, meandered downhill to the west. If it led to water, it offered both hydration and a guide. But first, shelter. The torrential rains would continue well into the night, and I needed a dry place to rest, if only briefly. I peered upward where branches formed a partial platform. A cluster of broad leaves created a semi-flat surface about 10 feet higher. Getting there required careful movement, crossing from branch to branch without misstep. Fear quickened my breath. One slip could send me tumbling, but staying on the ground felt worse. Testing each branch with my weight, I inched upward. My ribs protested, but I prioritized 3-point contact, 2 hands and 1 foot, then 2 feet and 1 hand. Leaves brushed across my face, carrying the forest's humid scent and the faint perfume of orchids tucked into the canopy. I paused, catching my breath, and braced both arms on a thick bough. The bark scraped against my palms, but it held. Reaching the makeshift platform, I lay prone, stomach against the wood. I pulled my legs up, then curled into a small depression where rainwater pooled sparingly. Carefully, I loaded my pack beside me, centering its weight. From one of the side pockets, I retrieved my compact tarp, meant originally for a ground shelter, and wrapped it over my lap. Using the ferrocerium rod, I sparked a tiny ember onto a small woven vine looped around 2 branches. Sparks drifted down, igniting dried leaf fragments I'd collected earlier. The fire sputtered at first, then caught glowing amber. Flames licked the edge of the leaves, crackling softly. Heat blossomed instantly, a welcome contrast to the damp chill seeping into my bones. I pressed my side to the warmth, careful to keep fabric between skin and flame. The fire's light flickered against the living walls of green around me. From here, I could see the forest's rhythms, a flash of bird wings, a glint of insect carapace and rainwater sliding off leaves in tiny rivulets. The smell of smoke drifted up, mingling with wet wood and earth, less a signal for rescue than a comfort to my frayed nerves. I tugged the tarp overhead, anchoring it to surrounding limbs. It wasn't a full roof, but the heavy canvas shades shielded me from most of the falling rain. Drips still found their way through, so I moved my pack to catch runoff and removed a spare bandage to pad the seat of my makeshift perch. My soaked clothes stiffened as they cooled. The fire's warmth helped ward off shivers. From this height, the night approached without warning. Light drained from the forest, turning shades of emerald into deep, inky black. I stoked the fire gently, adding small twigs torn from vines pinned nearby. Sparks danced upward, choking on the mist. My muscles relaxed for the first time since impact. Injuries still burned, but I felt a profound relief. I was above the worst of it, safe from ground predators, though the heights introduced new risks. I pulled out my compass and shifted my position so the needle pointed north. This moment of calm allowed me to plan my next moves. I'd rest until first light tend wounds with remaining antiseptic and gather what I could from the wreck visible through the canopy. The beacon's light still pulsed below, but I needed more signals, smoke, and shape. I settled back against the trunk, eyes closed, listening. The rustle of leaves overhead, the crack of branches under nocturnal animals, and the steady pop of firewood created a lullaby of sorts. My body ached, but my mind quieted. Up here, between earth and sky, I felt neither fully tethered nor adrift, just alive, belonging to the rhythm of the jungle. Sleep hovered at the edge of consciousness, promising brief respite. I resisted, noting each task left: reinforce, shelter, collect dry kindling, map direction with sunrise. Then, with everything in place, I allowed my thoughts to drift, lulled by the fire's glow, ringing through emerald shadows. The platform felt safe, a cradle amid chaos. Soon dawn would come. Until then, I remained vigilant, watchful, and ready, but finally able to rest in the arms of the canopy. The first gray light of dawn seeped through the canopy like liquid silver painting the wreckage, and my leafy perch in muted tones. As the sky brightened, I realized just how steep the descent would be. My muscles already throbbed from yesterday's climb, but thirst gnawed at me more insistently than pain. I could taste it at the back of my throat, dry and metallic. I needed fresh water and fast. I crouched by the fire pit and extinguished the embers with a handful of cool rainwater I'd saved watching steam rise from charred twigs. Leaving the compass wedged in the branch beside me, I slipped my knife into its sheath and slung the pack to my back. The damp fabric rubbed against my bandaged ribs, but I welcomed the pressure it reminded me I was still alive. Last night's rain had slowed, leaving the woods heavy with moisture. Vines dripped beads of liquid that caught the light as they fell, and the air smelled of new growth and hidden springs. I tested my grip on the branch beneath me, then slid down to the lower platform I'd built. My steps were slow and deliberate. A misstep could mean a fall that would reopen wounds or break a bone. I kept 3 points of contact, 2 hands and 1 foot at all times, until my feet touched the first sturdy branch. From there, I climbed down to the Y-fork and then to the vine ladder I'd fashioned. By the time I reached solid ground, my legs were trembling. I gulped air, listening to the world-awakened birds, trilling insects, chirping the distant whoosh of water. The stream's roar grew louder as I worked my way downhill, following the slope I'd spotted from above. The forest opened into a narrow ravine where water channeled between mossy stones and fallen logs. A faint path of flattened vegetation suggested animals, or perhaps water foragers like me had used it. I paused at the edge of the stream and knelt on a smooth boulder, dipping my metal bottle into the current. The liquid was clear, icy against my skin. I lifted the bottle to my lips and drank deeply. The water slid down my throat, cool and invigorating. Relief flooded my limbs, chasing away the stiffness of a sleepless night. I refilled the bottle twice, taking care to let larger debris wash away before drinking. Even fresh rainforest streams carry microorganisms, but I'd have to rely on fire to purify more. For now, a clear gulp was better than dying of thirst. I next examined my bandages. Clean water trickled through the layers, diluting the antiseptic. The forearm wrap felt damp but secure. The thigh binding shifted slightly when my muscles flexed. I knelt and retightened the strips around my thigh, pressing the metal splinter more firmly against the gash. It hurt like fire, but the tension kept the cloth from sliding. The rib binder, however, had slipped during the descent. I loosened it, adjusted the cords, then retied it higher under my chest. My breaths still came with a sting, but less intense than before. I tucked a clean cloth beneath the cord to prevent chafing. I paused, looking at the forest's reflection in the stream wavelets dancing like fractured mirrors of green. A pair of bright feathered parrots swooped overhead, their cries cutting through the hush. I watched them vanish into the foliage and remembered my own wings had been ripped away when the helicopter crashed. Today I would fly again by will alone. Filling my canteen once more, I scanned the bank for more firm ground. A horizontal log spanned from one side to the other, offering a potential bridge. I set the bottle aside and tested the log with my foot. It held. Leaning on my knife hilt, I crept across, balancing with slow, exaggerated steps. Halfway over the wood, groaned and flexed, but did not snap. Heart hammering, I made it across and exhaled in relief. The far bank revealed a small clearing, each blade of grass glinting with dew. Here no tangle of roots threatened to trip me, and the ground was firm beneath my boots. I set the bottle down and crouched, pulling out a small collection of rocks. I wanted to boil water for safety and to allow washing of bandage edges later. The clearing offered stones big enough to form a circle for containment. I gathered dry twigs from the shelter remnants I'd scattered last night, still crisp despite the rain's recent passing. I arranged them inside the rock circle and, using the ferrocerium rod, sparked a flame. The fire caught slowly, then roared as I added more twigs and small branches. Smoke coiled upward dark against the brightening sky. With fire crackling, I placed the metal bottle on a flat stone close to the heat. Water inside ascended behest as temperatures climbed. I watched closely, aware that if it boiled too hard, I risked scorching myself while removing it. When steam billowed from the spout, I knew it was hot enough to kill pathogens. This simple ritual, sheltering flames, cleansing water, felt like reclaiming control. While water boiled, I surveyed the immediate area. Between the trees, I spotted the jagged skeleton of the helicopter's tail peeking through leaves. If I followed the stream upstream, the forest might open into a larger clearing where the tail rotor lay. There, I could scavenge better materials, perhaps hydraulic fluid for a denser smoke signal, extra scraps for tools, even a mirror-like panel for signaling. But upstream meant steeper terrain and the possibility of rapids or waterfalls. Downstream offered flatter ground, but risked leading me deeper into the impenetrable wild. I crouched beside the fire and sipped the newly boiled water. It steamed in my mouth, carrying warmth through my chest. The burn was welcomed. I refilled my bottle with the remainder and secured it in my pack. Slipping into the shallow stream, I washed my bandaged forearm in the cooler current. The gauze turned slightly gray as dirt flushed out. I patted it with a clean cloth from my kit, then fed more elastic strips beneath the pad low on spare cloth, but better to have tighter support. My thigh and chest felt stable for now. My movements were painful but measured. I stood in the gentler shallows, letting water lap at my boots. The coldness bit into my bruised ribs, but the pain grounded me, a reminder that I was still alive, still fighting. I paused, closing my eyes to listen to the forest orchestra, the trill of insects, the murmur of flowing water, the faint rustle of leaves. Earlier, the jungle had felt oppressive. Now it seemed hospitable, nourishing. Clean water, a crackling fire, a moment of quiet. Those first acts of self-care shattered the sense of chaos. Fire's embers glowed orange behind me, smoke drifting the other way. I felt a gathering of calm, the knowledge that step by step I could meet this challenge. The stream would sustain me, but I needed to ration my water moving forward. I refilled my bottle to half, conserving space for more boiled water later. Packing my fire kit back into its small pouch, I extinguished the flames with river water stirring until no smoke rose. I wiped my hands on my pants and slung the pack onto my shoulders. Looking downstream, sunlight pierced the canopy in golden beams. In that moment, hope felt tangible, a path before me defined by the whispering water. Thirst no longer dominated my thoughts. Instead, the day's tasks unfurled, retrieve resources, upstream map a course to higher ground, signal rescue, again by nightfall. I took a deep breath, tasting fresh water on my tongue, and stepped forward into the forest's embrace. The sky began to darken mid-morning, though the dense canopy made time impossible to track. I'd been moving upstream, following the ribbon of water toward the wreck's tail section, when the first fat drops splattered onto my face. I paused beneath a broad-leafed heliconia, tilting my head back to let the rain drum against my forehead. It felt good at first, a cleansing balm on sunburned skin and aching muscles, but within minutes the patter turned to pounding. The forest exhaled a sudden roar of droplets. I vaulted over the log bridge I'd used to cross the stream, sprinting the few yards to a sheltered overhang formed by the roots of a massive fig tree. The roots arched outward and upward, carving out a dry alcove about 3 feet deep. I shoved my pack beneath the nearest root to keep it from soaking, then leaned against the damp bark, watching sheets of water cascade through the underbrush. The ground beneath my boots oozed into a slick of mud. My chest binder bit into my ribs as the torrent slammed into my torso, and I gasped, fighting to draw breath between the hammering downpour and the ache of broken ribs. Gear that had been merely damp was now drenched. The compass in my pocket felt frigid against my thigh. My shirt clung to me like wet cotton and weighed down every movement. Rainwater filled the bandages I'd applied, seeping through and mixing with dirt I'd washed away at the stream. The antiseptic meant to ward off infection was now diluted, its sting replaced by irritation as the water sloshed. I realized I needed to protect both wounds and supplies from the relentless rain. I spied the tarp in my pack's front pocket. Retrieving it, I unfolded the thin canvas, letting it catch the water. It ballooned like a sail under the torrent. I draped it over my shoulders, knotting the corners at my chest so it hung like a poncho. The makeshift garment offered scant warmth, but held off the worst of the downpour. My pack, wrapped in its own mini tarpaulin, remained bone dry, at least for the moment. Even with the tarp, rain found its way inside, soaking the fabric and pressing cold relief against my skin. I shivered, pulling the poncho tighter around my neck. every sound amplified in the storm, the slap of water on leaves, the distant crack of a trunk, creaking the hiss of runoff, slicing through undergrowth. The forest transformed into a living beast, every branch and leaf saturated, every root slick and treacherous. I needed to press on. The tail rotor lay perhaps half a mile upstream, a critical source of materials. But the day could not remain clear when the weather turned so savage. I weighed my options: shelter here until the rain eased, or brave the deluge to press forward. Time and comfort screamed for respite. Survival argued for progress. I inhaled, filling my lungs with humid air, and decided I would move. At least I would stay in motion, and motion meant hope. Stepping off the root ledge, I tested every foothold as I climbed the muddy slope. My boots sank into the softened earth, with each step the suction tugging at my ankle. I placed my cane knife tip into the ground ahead of me, using it as an additional stabilizer. The blade cut into the mud, offering traction. I braced my body against the slippery incline, leaning forward, planting hands and feet deliberately. The weight of my pack pressed on my shoulders, but I accepted the strain. My progress could not stop for fear of rain. Higher up, the forest opened into a narrow clearing where sunlight peeked through the storm clouds in shimmering columns. Rainwater sluiced down the slope, transforming roots into miniature rivers. I shifted gears, grabbing onto low branches instead of relying solely on my feet. The leaves overhead dripped, and each drop sounded like a tiny pistol against my helmet. I moved with caution and urgency, adrenaline and dread coiling together. As I crested a small rise, I saw the helicopter's massive tail jutting from a tangle of vines and foliage. Its metal skin, once painted a crisp white and red, was now streaked with mud and moss. The rotor assembly lay nearby, blades twisted but intact. A storm-soaked miracle. I forced my boots across the slippery earth, landing at the rotor's base. My fingers trembled as I brushed chunks of sodden undergrowth from the blades, revealing their curvature. I needed metal for tools, but first I sought larger panels for shelter reinforcement. Near the fuselage, I pried at a side panel with my knife, levered one end loose, then twisted until the entire rectangular sheet popped free. The metal groaned, bending under my grip, but I managed to wedge it between roots, creating a partial shield against the rain. This panel, once attached to the helicopter's door, would serve as a rainfly or windbreaker when revealed beyond the canopy. Next, I examined the rotor blades themselves. Each bore a small reflective decal near the tip, a potential signaling device. My knife scraped at the decal's edge until it peeled away the adhesive layer clinging to the aluminum. I buried the sticker in my pocket dry. A piece of polished metal could reflect sunlight, an alternative to fire or beacon. I repeated the process with another blade, securing 2 reflectors, but the storm had no care for my gains. Rain pelted me, seeping through my poncho, chilling me to the bone. My soaked gloves offered little protection. I grabbed an extra length of rope from the wreck's tangle, likely part of a cargo net, and wound it around the new metal panel. With the other end, I tied the makeshift shield to a low branch overhead. It flapped in the wind, like a banner creating a small dry zone beneath. I knelt beneath this impromptu awning, catching my breath. The rain's cadence dropped only slightly, then returned with renewed ferocity. I measured my soaked sleeves against my torso, no blood, but the chill was intense. Shivering, I ripped off a length of cloth and wound it around my neck as a scarf to ward off the cold drop on my nape. Each movement reminded me of my injuries, the tug on my ribs, the ache in my thigh, the sting on my forearm. Yet the rain made everything worse, turning every scrape into a constant throb. My mind whirred with calculations. I could scavenge more from the tail section, extra rope hydraulic tubing, perhaps even a small mirror from the cockpit's control panel, but my hands numbed in the cold, and time dragged each second, feeling like minutes. Thunder rolled overhead, a low rumble that vibrated through my chest. I realized the storm's full force had arrived. A thunderclap split too close for comfort, and I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut. When I opened them again, the forest was darker, as though night had descended. The canopy dripped in rhythmic pulses, and the undergrowth glistened with slick green lamellae. I needed to find more substantial shelter before night. This lean-to was fine for a quick repair, but not for hours of rest or for sustaining this rain. The corridor of trees I saw upstream might lead to a rock overhang or cave entrance. A narrow stream carved in granite could reveal a dry pocket. If I hurried, I could reach it before visibility plunged entirely. I slung my pack back across my shoulders, adjusting the strap to ease shoulder pain. My hip objected sharply, but I ignored it, focusing on each frantic step. Lowering my head, I followed the stream bed, now swollen, rushing beside me with a fierce roar. Mud spat at my boots. Every branch and root seemed intent on sending me sprawling, but I refused to yield. After 10 grueling minutes, I turned a bend in the watercourse and spotted a rocky bluff, a smooth, semi-sheltered alcove, about 10 feet high and wide enough to stand upright. I darted toward it, my breath ragged heart hammering. Rainwater sluiced off the front, but pockets beneath the overhang stayed dry. I slipped inside the cold, immediately replaced by relative warmth. Inside the alcove, the stone walls were carved by centuries of water, forming shallow basins that collected small puddles less ideal for a fire, but enough to wash wounds later. I brushed my hands against the rock, grateful for solid support. Slipping off my tarp poncho, I hung it from a protruding branch, letting it drip. My pack followed, and I shook it gently, water cascading off. Inside this refuge, the rain sounded distant, a muffled roar rather than a violent strike. I exhaled, letting my body slump against the damp stone. Water pooled at my boots, but my bandaged arm and thigh felt sheltered. Pain surged through my ribcage, but the alcove's solidity reassured me. I rummaged in my pack and pulled out the reflective decals, peeling their backing with numb fingers. Placing them on the rock face outside, angled toward the sky, I hoped any passing aircraft would catch them. I also rechecked the beacon's cover, melding technology and improvisation. As the storm raged, I settled onto a flat rock, pulling my knees to my chest. The world outside might as well have been on fire, but here, amid wet stone, I felt a fragile calm. My thoughts drifted to home, the warmth of my partner's smile, the hum of city traffic, the clink of coffee cups in the morning. Rain slapped the earth, but I could block it out. Thunder clapped again, but I no longer flinched. I closed my eyes, focusing on the hush within the alcove. My heartbeat, my ragged breath, the soft drip of water. Outside, the rainforest prowled and roared, but I had carved out this small sanctuary. The storm would pass. I only needed to endure until its fury dwindled. Eventually, the rain softened to a steady drizzle. Light returned, albeit dim, through the clouds. I peered out. The forest glistened rivulets, snaking down leaves, the stream churning. My makeshift reflectors clung to the bluff, the beacon blinking below. I felt a surge of pride. I had faced the deluge and emerged with resources intact. Standing, I dusted off my pants and secured the poncho. Beyond the alcove lay everything waiting the path upstream toward more salvage or a different route toward signaling sites. For now, I would rest, tend wounds once more with fresh water and gather strength. The jungle had tested me in torrential rain. Next, it would test me in darkness. I settled against the bluff's interior, hands pressed to my bandages, feeling the pulse of life beneath the cloth. Drops still fell, but here they were gentle like a lullaby. My body cried for respite, my mind for hope, and I marooned in this living cathedral of green, promised to endure until rescue found me. Night's veil had settled over the rainforest, yet beneath the alcove's rim, I remained alert. Lantern light would be useless here. Instead, I relied on my senses. Ahead, the stream's roar softened into a steady murmur, while the forest around me pulsed with life. I could hear but not see insects, chirping distant howls, and the subtle skitter of creatures on wet leaves. I unwrapped a fresh bandage for my forearm, dabbing at the dried antiseptic in the dim glow of a small flashlight gleaming against polished rock reflectors outside. Pain radiated like embers, but I pressed on, ensuring no corners slipped loose. A sudden click echoed ahead, metal snapping from the remains of a poacher's cable snare hidden under leaf litter. My heart seized. Poachers used these traps for big cats and ungulates. In my weakened state, a snare might. I swallowed hard. I rose silently, slipping from the alcove, my feet seeking the soft padding of moss rather than crunching undergrowth. Lantern light had died in my pack days ago. I moved by muscle memory, guided by the map in my mind, and the steady blink of the helicopter beacon glimpsed through the trees. The trap lay half buried near the stream's bank, a steel cable loop attached to a trigger plate. Its rusted coil promised a deadly grasp. I knelt, studying it by flashlight. The cable glinted wet as I worked my knife's tip under the tangle. With an effort, I severed the loop, freeing the trigger. No injury this time, just a close call. I tucked the cable end into a pouch wire could be repurposed. I pressed deeper into the undergrowth. The air grew thick with the tang of animal musk. I froze as a low rumble shook the ground ahead, followed by a distinct hissing sound. I swallowed. It could be a large constrictor. In my previous training, I'd learned to give such beasts wide berth, yet I needed to move. Slowly, I pressed forward, senses flaring. Every brush of leaf against my leg felt amplified. Then I saw it, a slender form, coiled at the base of a tree, a pit viper's unmistakable pattern shining in reflected flashlight. It lifted its triangular head, hooded eyes fixed on me. My panic stuttered in my chest, but I recalled the rule's slow movements. I froze, heart pounding, then shifted my gaze to the ground just outside the snake's strike range, about half a meter. Exhaling, I stepped back 1, 2, 3, counting silently. The snake watched, then uncoiled and melted into the leaf litter, vanishing as soundlessly as it had appeared. I exhaled fully and wiped sweat from my brow. The risk of venom coursing through my body chilled me more than the night air. I checked my pack for anti-venom, but I'd left it in the Rex medical kit. It was beyond reach. Prevention was my only cure. I secured the wire from the snare around my forearm, reinforcing my previous makeshift pad. If a snake grazed me, at least the cable might slow the fang. The addition dug into my skin, but it felt like armor. Further on, the foliage parted to reveal a small clearing, illuminated by moonlight spilling through a canopy gap. Around a moss-covered stump, the carcass of a wild pig lay gutted recent kill, likely by a jaguar or hyena. The scent was strong coppery and sweet. Instinct warned me the predator wasn't far. I edged forward, scanning for prints. There, paw marks pressed into the soft earth. I traced their direction, noting they led away from me toward deeper darkness. Good. Still, I needed caution. I skirted the clearing's edge, my flashlight bright enough only to reveal a foot or two of ground. I paused by a leaning tree, listening. Nothing. Then a sudden rustle from above a large cassowary, drawn by the same carcass, crashed through leaves and took flight on creaking legs. It charged past me with an eerie hiss, feathers bristling. I stepped aside, heart in my throat, as it stormed deeper into the night, unbothered by my presence. Night in the rainforest wasn't silent. It was unpredictable. I pressed onward, guided by the rotating blink of red light and the distant drip of water. Each step risked a trap, a free fall, or a predatory ambush. My flashlight's battery flickered. I needed to conserve it. I clicked it off and navigated by touch and memory, keeping the beacon's glow on my left shoulder as a waypoint. The path narrowed, then opened onto a rocky stream ford, smooth stones slick with algae. I crouched, hands splayed for balance, and picked my way across. Beneath the surface, I glimpsed the shadow of a crocodilian snout, a caiman perhaps stalking in the shallows. My breath hitched. I froze, then crept backward. A misstep could send me into its gaping maw. Once I was safe on solid rock, I exhaled and stored the flashlight. My pulse slowed to a rhythm as I skirted the water's edge. I slid a hand along the tree bark, feeling its grooves guide me. The beacon blinked steadily now that I was closer to the wreck. Its promised rescue and escape kept me moving. Though the predators tested me, I remained a step ahead, sharp senses, slow movements, and respect for the jungle's inheritors. At last, I emerged at the creek's fork, where the river split around a mossy island. Between the two channels lay the aft fuselage half buried in silt. I recognized the mount points for the tail rotor. The beacon's control box lay exposed, its wires sparking defensively in the water. I hurried across the narrower channel, boots sliding, and reached the debris. I sank to one knee beside the wreck, pressing my hand against the cold metal heart, thudding. Predators lurked, rain pattered, and darkness pressed in, but I had reached my goal. With trembling fingers, I reconfigured wiring extending the beacon's battery life. My injuries screamed, but I focused on the task: salvage signal, survive. The jungle's predators circled, but I held the night at bay, armed with improvised armor and unwavering resolve. Each threat overcame, reinforced the truth I would endure. And so I stayed until the beacon's pulse signaled midnight, my marker of small triumph in the wilderness. Morning light filtered in pale ribbons through the canopy, painting the forest floor in mottled greens and golds. I had spent the night half alert, listening as the red beacon pulsed and the jungle's creatures held their court. But now hunger gnawed at my stomach like an insistent animal. My bandages still felt damp, my ribs ached, and my energy reserves were running dangerously low. Yesterday's burst to the stream and the scramble to the tail rotor had provided hydration and hope, but little in the way of sustenance. I needed food and fast. With my pack slung low, I moved toward the paler patches of undergrowth where edible plants often thrived. My utility knife, still sheathed, lay ready at my side. In my training, I'd learned the basics of jungle foraging: avoid white sap astride of milky vines, watch for glossy leaves clustered in threes, and favor bright-colored fruits that birds and monkeys favored. But theory rarely matched the nightmare of damp, unfamiliar territory. I knelt beside a cluster of low shrubs that bore small, round berries, deep purple, when ripe, each about the size of a marble. I plucked one and held it to my lips. It smelled sweet like overripe grapes. I bit, and warm juice burst across my tongue. No burn, no bitterness, just a tart, pleasant sweetness. I popped 3 more into my mouth, feeling immediate relief as calories filled my belly. Encouraged, I gathered a handful, pressing the berries into a cloth pouch. Above me, bright flashes of red heliograph ants scuttled over bark. Their bites could leave pustules, so I kept my distance, flicking stray ants off my sleeves with knuckles reinforced by the wire bandage. Each flick reminded me of the wire's makeshift purpose, both armor and tether to sanity. Moving on, I spotted a creeping vine with clusters of yellow flower petals. Near the base, the vine produced knobby tubers half buried in soft soil. I pried one free with gloved fingers, the skin pale and dusty. I sliced off a thin piece with my knife and touched it to my tongue. A mild, starchy flavor, no burn, no tingle, indicated safety. Encouraged, I harvested 2 larger tubers, wiping off soil and tucking them into my pack's side pocket. Sunlight danced in patches as I navigated to a fallen log, overgrown with moss and fungi. Mushrooms, some glossy, others dull, sprouted in clusters. My pulse quickened. Many fungi in the rainforest are deadly. I recalled the golden rule: if you can't positively identify it, don't eat it. I reached for the small mushroom guide in my pack, a laminated sheet with illustrations. Under flickering light, I matched the physical characteristics: a flat cap edged in white gills, a slender stem without rings, and a gentle tan hue. It resembled the edible mealy cap variety I'd studied, but similar-looking deadly cousins existed. I hesitated. Better to remain hungry than face liver failure. I pressed on, leaving the mushrooms untouched, and encountered a troop of leafcutter ants marching through a tunnel of greenery. They carried bright green leaf fragments larger than their bodies. History taught me they farm fungus, not eat the leaves themselves. Following the tunnel's entrance, I peered inside. Wet earth, maybe earthworms or grubs, lurked there. Protein sources. I nudged a stick inside, and tiny grub-like larvae scuttled away from the disturbance. I pried at the earth with my knife. Within inches, I uncovered plump grubs, translucent and slick. I hesitated again. Raw, they tasted bitter. I had no fire now, and the cold water bottle only served wounds. I pushed them back. No risk. Hungry but cautious. I continued toward a clearing I'd noted near the creek where small palm shoots sprouted. Beneath the fronds lay young palm hearts, tender, crunchy, and edible if harvested carefully. I knelt, severing one shoot at its base. It yielded easily, steaming slightly in the humid morning air. I snapped off the tough outer layers until a white core revealed itself. I broke off a chunk and chewed. Nutty, mildly sweet, safe, and filling. I gathered 2 more licking sap from my fingers. Weight in my pack increased, but better that than emptiness. I also recognized the need for protein fruit, and tubers offered carbs, but muscle and brain needed more. I recalled the water's edge near the wreck, where a thin fish had glimpsed me yesterday. The stream might hold small fish or crustaceans. I set down my pack and pulled out the small fishing line and hook tucked away in a side pocket. I removed it carefully, untangling the line and baiting with a sliver of palm heart. Kneeling at the bank, I cast gently. The hook sank into the current with a soft plop. I held the line loosely, careful not to scare away any fish. Minutes ticked by. Then a tug, sharp and sudden. I jerked the rod upward. A small catfish lay wriggling at the hook, its barbels flaring. I quickly snapped its neck, then wrapped it in a clean cloth to hold until I could gut it. Satisfied, I packed the fishing gear away and returned to my foraged stock. Berries, tubers, palm hearts, and now fish, a balanced bounty given the circumstances. I cleaned and gutted the fish beside the stream, discarding entrails downstream. I scraped algae and grit from the flesh with my knife, then laid it on a flat stone. I wanted heat for cooking, but the alcove fires were too far to fetch tinder. The sun had come out fully now. I recalled the metal sheet, tied near the alcove, its surface reflective. If I angled it correctly, sunlight could ignite tinder. I retrieved the metal panel from my pack, the one from the tail rotor's reflective decal, and angled it to catch direct sunlight. Near the stream's bank, where dry leaves had fallen on a mossy rock, I positioned them as ignitable tinder. I held the panel until a sharp beam concentrated onto a single point. After several tense seconds, smoke curled from the leaves. I cupped my hands around the emerging ember, blew gently, and coaxed it into flame. I transferred the fire to small twigs, gradually building a modest blaze. Heat licked at the underside of the fish as I skewered it on a sharpened stick and positioned it above the flame. Sizzle and aroma rose quickly, the flesh turning opaque and firm. I roasted the fish whole, its skin crisping in patches. I rotated the stick slowly, ensuring even cooking. The sensation of warmth on my chilled fingers felt like a blessing. When the fish was golden and flaky, I broke it apart with my knife and ate it slowly, savoring protein that soothed aching muscles and hungered mind alike. I washed it down with clear stream water, no longer hesitating at potential microbes. Energy flooded my limbs, and I felt steadiness return to my footsteps. I stoked the small fire with leftover twigs until it glowed hot embers, then snuffed it out, scattering the hot stones to cool. I refilled my cloth pouch with fresh berries, the tubers snug in my side pocket, and wrapped the palm hearts in a leaf bundle I tucked inside my pack. The metal panel went back under the tarp layer, weight shifting slightly. Standing, I exhaled and surveyed the jungle around me. Hunger had subsided, clarity returned. My injuries still throbbed, but strength returned through deliberate foraging and careful cooking. The morning's trial had proven I could find and prepare food safely, even in the face of deadly toxins and ferocious predators. The rainforest, once an abyss of threat, now offered sustenance and a fragile alliance. I slung my pack over my shoulders and set my sights toward the next task, locating higher ground for a stronger signal and mapping a route to potential rescue paths. Darkness descended with a speed that felt cruel one moment. The jungle burst with emerald hues under the sun. The next it vanished, leaving me alone in a velvet abyss pierced only by the red beacon's pulse and the faint glow of reflected moonlight on damp leaves. I emerged from the alcove at dusk, carrying a handful of dry kindling and my tarnished compass, eager to return to the tree platform before complete blackness fell. My muscles trembled with exhaustion, but adrenaline pushed me onward. Climbing back up the fig roots into the alcove required caution. Roots slick with moss threatened to betray each handhold. I moved deliberately, one hand, 1 foot, 1 breath. Reaching the platform, I spread the tarp poncho taut over the makeshift shelter and arranged damp branches inside to catch any residual drips. My pack lay in a corner, and I nestled beside it, the fire-smoothed stones warm beneath my back. The night brought new terrors. The forest transformed into an orchestra of unseen creatures. Tree frogs trilled in rapid sequences, their chorus building to a crescendo, and then silencing abruptly, leaving me straining to hear what came next. Insects buzzed within arm's reach, tapping against leaves like impatient drummers. Twice I heard the low growl of something large, perhaps a jaguar stalking prey, or a tapir shuffling through underbrush. My heart pounded. I wrapped my arms around my knees, pulling the tarp closer for warmth. Rain from earlier had soaked through my clothing, and residual dampness clung to my skin. The fire's embers from this morning had long since died, and I no longer dared risk rekindling flames. The smoke might attract curious predators. Instead, I focused on staying awake, each second an act of will. Sleep might steal me when I needed to react to a sudden rustle or sniff in the dark. Loneliness crept in like a living thing. Memories flooded my mind, laughter around a campfire, The comfort of soft sheets, the tap of a loved one's footsteps. In the concrete world, isolation was conquerable. Here the jungle's immensity swallowed me whole. I pressed my forehead against my knees, whispering my own name to ground myself. You're here. You're alive. A piercing screech shattered the night sky, a chorus of insects. A wounded animal, the sound felt like knives slicing through the stillness. I sat bolt upright, scanning the darkness. My flashlight lay inside my pack, battery dim, for more than a day. I resisted the urge to switch it on, afraid the beam would reveal me to unseen eyes. Instead, I clutched my knife's hilt through fabric, ready for anything. Time distorted, minutes stretched into hours. The beacon's pulse became a metronome, marking each breath. Each inhalation brought the scent of wet earth and decomposing leaves. Each exhalation carried the taste of fear and achievement. Fatigue gnawed at my eyelids, but if I slept, I risked a fall from the platform or a stealthy predator stealing close. So I resisted the peace of unconsciousness. At one point, a rustling emerged directly beneath me. My fingers tightened on the tarp's edge as I leaned over the platform and peered into the blackness below. Two glowing eyes peered back, small, reflective, curious. A coatimundi, I realized, drawn by the scent of fish I'd smoked hours ago. It chirped softly and patted away on nimble paws. Relief flooded me, a harmless visitor rather than a tooth and claw hunter. I exhaled and leaned back, cracking my knuckles to ward off stiffness. My ribs protested. I shifted weight slowly, mindful not to jolt the chest binder. The fabric scraped gently against the metal panel I'd wedged beside me for signaling. Even its dull edge reminded me of resourcefulness. The night held lessons. Listen for small sounds. Watch for pairs of eyes. Trust in instincts honed by desperation. Loneliness gave way to resolve. I had survived impact, first aid, rainstorms, predators' hunger, and now this vigil. Each trial forged a sharper will. I allowed myself a moment to marvel. I was perched high in a living cathedral of green, surrounded by threats, yet still breathing, still thinking, still fighting. I unfolded the compass and trained my fingers over the needle's slight tremors. It read north. Someday I'd navigate a final path out of here. For tonight, I noted the eastward drift of the beacon's light. Dawn would come, and with it another series of tasks. But the night was mine to conquer first. A distant branch cracked a giant woodpecker, or the approach of something larger. My pulse hammered. I dared not close my eyes again. Instead, I sat motionless, senses stretching beyond physical limits, attuned to the forest's heartbeat. I could hear the waters far off rushing, the soft flight of bats, the murmur of territorial calls. In that darkness, I felt intimately connected to the world around me, even as I longed for human voice. Hours passed, my eyelids fluttered, but refused to close. The jungle's threats receded and returned in waves, each broken by the beacon's unwavering pulse, a lifeline glowing red at the tree's base. If I fell, that light would flicker out of reach, but it still burned. Gray morning light crept back, tinting leaves with pale green. The chorus of frogs and insects surged once more, but this time I recognized the signal: daybreak. Relief and triumph washed through me. I slid down the root ladder with aching limbs, determined to remain aware until my feet hit solid earth. Once on the ground, I drank deeply from the stream before making fire to warm my bones and tend fresh bandages. The night had been longer than it had any right to feel, but I had prevailed in this crucible of fear and solitude. Each sound had sharpened me, each brush of danger awakened me, each moment of loneliness steeled my spirit. Now dawn promised new challenges, yet I faced them, knowing I had mastered the night. The fire's warmth did little to thaw the chill lodged deep within my chest as I sat by the stream cleaning and rebinding my wounds. Dawn's light glowed pale, but something darker stirred inside me, an ache far more insidious than broken bones or bleeding cuts. My hands moved mechanically, yet my mind felt trapped under a weight far heavier than my pack. I realized with a sinking clarity that survival's initial adrenaline rush had faded, leaving raw exhaustion and doubt in its wake. I paused, water dripping from the rag in my hand, and stared at my reflection in the creek. The person looking back was gaunt eyes, sunken hair plastered to my forehead, cheeks are hollowed by hunger and sleepless nights. This face had stared down impossible odds for days, yet now it seemed to plead for release. A distant memory flickered my partner's laugh echoing in our kitchen, the soft touch of home. That world felt impossibly remote. Here each breath scraped against chafed ribs, and each thought returned to fear. What if no one comes? What if this forest becomes my grave? I tied off the tourniquet on my thigh, heart pounding not from exertion, but despair. The cool metal panel I'd rescued from the wreck leaned against a nearby root, catching morning light in a bright strip. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It had been a beacon of hope, reflecting sunlight, signaling rescue, but now it felt like a weight, a reminder of how adrift I truly was. My pack's straps bit into bruised shoulders as I lifted it, though it felt heavier than ever. I'd considered staying put, making this alcove by the stream my permanent base, a safe haven, however precarious. If I simply sat here tending my wounds and rationing water, perhaps rescue efforts would spot my signals eventually. But stagnation snuffed out any chance of finding higher ground for better visibility. Fear slid into dread. The thought twisted my gut. Maybe no one was searching this region. Maybe the helicopter's beacon battery had died before anyone ever traced its pulse. Maybe I was a casualty whose fate no longer mattered. I sank to the ground, back against a mossy log pack, still on, and let tears burn behind my eyes. I closed them and pressed my forehead to the pack's rough canvas, inhaling its familiar scent of leather, dirt, and rain. I whispered into it, as if speaking to someone who might still be listening. I can't keep doing this. My voice cracked fragile as broken twigs. The forest answered only with distant bird calls. No comforting murmur of human voices, no reassuring hum of machinery. Gravity pressed on my shoulders, and I felt bent beneath its pull. The wind stirred leaves above, and I thought I heard laughter mocking distant. I looked up. Branches swayed in the breeze, their motion indifferent to my pain. Resignation beckoned a siren, drifting through the trees. It offered an end to this torment. Close my eyes, stop fighting. I felt the pull and alluring surrender that would release me from relentless struggle. My fingers brushed the ferrocerium rod at my belt. Fire had been my ally. Iron rusted in my palms, its promise of warmth and signal dulled by my spirit's haze. A flash of movement snapped me from my reverie. Through the trees, a green and yellow macaw soared its wings, flashing bright against the dim forest interior. It let out a startled screech and banked away, feathers glinting. The sharp burst of color caught my eye. The bird was free here, untamed and vibrant. It did not hesitate or falter. It flew because it must. I stared at the spot it had vanished into, and something stirred inside me, like a seed cracking open. If a creature born to survive under these branches could rise and soar, then perhaps I could too. My gaze drifted back to the scratched metal panel. It reflected the blaze of the sun, a promise unfulfilled. I clutched it, feeling its cold ridges cut into numb fingers. It could still shine, still call out my existence to the skies above. Slowly I wiped the tears from my face. The ache in my chest remained, but it no longer felt like a beckoning void. It felt like an ember waiting to ignite. I took a breath, deep and shuddering, and exhaled, watching the mist swirl over the water's surface. Rising, I loosened my pack straps and closed my eyes, centering on the rhythm of my heartbeat. Each thump was evidence of life's insistence. Fear tried to press me down, but I pressed back with determination as fragile as the bounding macaw's flight. I had fought every day for survival. I would fight one more. With deliberate care, I grabbed my compass from my belt. North lay through denser forest. West led toward a ridge I'd glimpsed yesterday. I didn't have strength for both. I chose the ridge higher ground, meant clearer signals, and perhaps a path out of this labyrinth of green. I slung the pack over one shoulder, steeling myself against its weight. I planted my boots firmly in the mud and began walking each step, an act of defiance. Rain threatened overhead, but held its breath, nature's momentary truce. My ribs protested, my muscles shook, but I pressed forward. The forest watched in silence as I moved. The macaw's cry echoed somewhere ahead, wild, untamed, unstoppable. I followed the sound, heart clenching, forging a path through ferns and fallen branches. Each stride brought me closer to the ridge, closer to hope. Resignation remained at the creek, but I left it behind in spirals of mist. Step by step, I reclaimed my will to survive. The climb toward the ridge was a battle against gravity and fatigue. My ribs screamed with every step, and my thighs burned from yesterday's exertion, but I inhaled the damp forest air and pressed on. The forest floor sloped upward, tangled roots snaking like viperous sentinels that threatened to trip me. I paused, pressing my palm against a wide root to steady myself. Each breath rattled through my binder, a harsh reminder of every fracture. Yet I focused not on the pain, but on the goal higher ground. As the incline steepened, patches of exposed bedrock cut through the undergrowth. I used these solid footholds like steps carved by nature itself. Moss underfoot made each placement precarious. I extended my knife hilt downward, using it as a third leg for balance. My pack's straps dug into sore shoulders, but I tightened them anyway, trading comfort for stability. Halfway up, I reached a break in the trees where sunlight pierced the canopy, illuminating a fallen log spanning a chasm of tangled roots. The log's torn end revealed splintered wood, but it looked sturdy enough. I tested it by stomping firmly. There was no give. I exhaled and balanced on one foot, then the other, before stepping onto the log. It creaked but held. Beneath, the forest dropped away into dimness. Goats might balk at cliffs, but I had no choice. Arms outstretched, I inched across, heart pounding, not from the climb, but from the fear of a fatal misstep. On the other side, the vegetation thinned. I ducked under a curtain of vines and emerged into a narrow ravine lined with boulders streaked green with algae. Water dripped steadily from above, feeding a trickle that wove around stones. Here, higher than the creek I'd relied on, the air felt cooler, fresher. My pace slowed. I took small sips from my bottle, tasting sweetness and relief. Above me, the ridge loomed jagged rock formations, breaking the tree line against the sky. I clawed my way up the ravine using every handhold and foothold. The rock face was oiled by moisture, demanding careful test grips. I found small ledges and muscled my way upward, boots scraping for purchase. At one point, a slip nearly sent me sprawling. My knife edge caught in a crevice, halting my descent. Heart racing, I steadied myself and continued. Exhaustion made cognitive tasks difficult, but I remembered my plan once atop the ridge. I would clear a patch for a signal fire and use the reflective panel to flash daylight toward possible search aircraft. I pictured the metal gleaming under the sun, a beacon against the jungle's sea of green. Finally, I reached a flattened outcrop, enough space for me to stand upright without brushing foliage. I collapsed onto the rock, breathing hard, watching mist swirl below me like tendrils of silver. My pack slid off. I retrieved the reflective decal stickers and metal panel, placing them side by side. The wind here was stronger, whipping my tarp poncho into a makeshift flag. I considered lighting a fire, but decided against it. Smoke might not rise above the canopy. Instead, I would rely on heliograph signals and shape. I propped the metal panel against a jagged boulder, angling it toward the east, where morning light would strike best. I positioned the decal stickers around its edge to catch less direct rays. Practicing with my palm over the panel, I sent a quick flash, cover, expose, cover, expose. The movement was rhythmic, controlled. If an aircraft passed, they'd notice. Now I needed clearance. I knelt and arranged stones to form a rough circle, using larger rocks to shield my modest vigil from wind. Inside the circle, I placed a few handfuls of dry grass I'd stuffed in a pouch earlier, enough tinder to ignite a signal fire if clouds parted. With everything in place, I surveyed the horizon. Trees gave way here and there to open sky. If I could reach one small rock pinnacle ahead, I'd gain a panoramic view, an ideal platform to truly signal. My body warned me, every muscle protesting, but despair had no place here, only purposeful action. I rose slowly, stooping under low-hanging branches as I edged toward the pinnacle. Each step felt unsteady, but eventually I stood atop the protruding rock, the world sprawling beneath me. I extended my arms and twisted the reflective panel until a shaft of sunlight volleyed against the ridge's opposite wall, then over dense treetops. I repeated the flash sequence for several minutes, my skin prickling in the thin air. My pulse raised not from exertion, but exhilaration. I was no longer trapped in the miasma of roots and vines. I had claimed a lofty vantage. I caught my breath and replaced the panel in my pack. The decals, spots of paint, caught in lichen, would stay where they were silent guardians. Now I turned my eyes skyward, scanning for any sign of movement. Clouds drifted, but no silhouettes broke the blue. The climb had exacted its toll. My ribs burned like coals, my thighs quivered, and a cold ache settled in my bones. Yet I felt a surge of triumph. I had conquered gravity and fear, crafting a platform for escape. The ridge was more than a mountaintop. It was a foothold on hope. With the sun climbing higher, I returned to the outcrop's flat, knelt by the stone circle, and prepared to light the tinder. A gust of wind rattled branches, and a solitary hawk cried overhead an audience to my resolve. Placing a spark to the dry grass with the ferro rod, I coaxed a thin flame that blossomed quickly. Smoke curled upward, a slender thread against the sky. I knelt beside the fire hands, warming face lifted to its promise. Each wisp of smoke carried my plea: find me, rescue me, bring me home. And so I waited atop the ridge, heartbeat echoing in my ears, unwavering in the knowledge that I had created my own beacon of survival. Smoke curled on the horizon as the sun climbed toward midday, a silvery wisp against the green expanse. My heart thundered at the sight. I sprinted forward, ribs protesting with every stride, adrenaline dulling the ache just enough. This had to be rescue fire. Human smoke meant someone alive, someone who could help me escape. I clutched the pack straps and pushed through the undergrowth branches, clawing at my arms, roots snagging my boots. Each step was a gamble. One misstep could send me sprawling and shatter what remained of my battered body, but hope drove me onward. The plume drifted lazily above a small clearing, its gray tendrils dissipating into the canopy. I broke through the final line of ferns and froze. What lay before me was not a search party's organized camp, but a circle of charred logs, arranged in a perfect ring, the remnants of someone else's signal fire, grown cold and abandoned. Tattered rags hung from forks of saplings, fluttering like ghosts in the light breeze. An overturned cooking pot lay near the center, its interior coated with rusted stains. Whoever had been here had left in haste or had not survived. I descended into the hollow boots, crunching on crisp leaves rather than the mud I'd grown accustomed to. I dropped to my knees beside the fire pit, where embers lay dead beneath layers of ash. Tender shoots of weeds had already begun reclaiming the clearing. I traced the char marks with a single finger, then lifted my gaze to the surrounding trees. No footprints, at least none fresh enough to see easily, but the rags suggested someone had clung here long enough to signal only to vanish. Shame pricked at me. Had I been so deluded by desire to see smoke that I leapt without thought? Had I found another victim rather than salvation? My chest tightened with regret, each breath introducing a fresh stab of pain. Yet dragging near collapse felt foolish now. I needed to know, was there any trace of Lonk here at all? I stood and circled the clearing, scanning the edges for clues. Beneath a clump of broad leaves, I discovered flattened grass and a scorched stick, likely the tool used to stoke the fire. It bore fresh ash, but no scorch marks beyond the pit. I followed a faint trail of footprints leading northward, a narrow depression in the grass. Only one set suggesting a lone traveler. The footprints were too large for mine, but seemed human, perhaps living off the land like me. I knelt to study them, pressing a finger into the soil. The print was shallow, as though the person moved quickly, not lingering to forage or rest. That indicated urgency, escape, or pursuit. The prints led toward thick vines draped over a low-hanging branch, then vanished in a tangle of brush. I considered my options, retrace the person's path, risk getting lost, or stay and tend my own signals. My pack felt heavier with doubt, so I returned to the fire pit. I gathered a handful of dry leaves and twigs I'd tucked away for tinder and reassembled the ring with loose stones from the periphery. My ribs protested when I bent, but I knelt and sparked a flame with my ferrocerium rod. The tinder lit with a gentle hiss, and I coaxed it into a smoky blaze that curled upward in lazy spirals. The pillar of smoke seemed timid compared to the distant plume that had lured me, but it was mine, my claim on the sky. As the fire burned, I rummaged through the clearing for other supplies. Beside a mossy stump, I spotted a small cache, a plastic bottle with turbid water, 2 granola bars unopened and nestled in damp leaves, and a battered pocket knife. I stared at them, heart thrumming. Had the person died nearby, unable to find clean water, or ignited a fire to no avail? Or had they returned for supplies later? I pocketed the knife. Its serrated edge might prove invaluable, and set the granola bars into my pack. My stomach tightened at the thought of eating. I rationed every calorie meticulously. Yet hunger now felt like an insistent companion. Refusing sustenance felt cruel. I drank a small sip from the bottle. The water was murky, but cold, and I held the liquid in my mouth before swallowing, tasting a faint, earthy tang. It settled my stomach and dampened the throbbing in my temples. I wrapped the bottle in cloth and stowed it at the bottom of my pack. The granola bars went into a side compartment, and I tucked the pocket knife into my belt. The fire crackled, sending sparks that drifted through the branches above, mingling with the curling smoke. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe rescue might arrive here, drawn by the smoke of my own making. But as the flame uncovered more of the clearing, the emptiness pressed back in. No footprints returned, no voices called. The forest, even in daylight, felt vast and indifferent. A breeze stirred overhead, bending branches and whispering through the leaves. The smoke wavered and thinned, dispersing into the emerald heights. I realized that rekindling hope here would only tether me to a place abandoned by its own signaler. I needed to continue higher ground, clearer skies, fresher signals. I rose, brushing ash from my palms. Before leaving, I gathered all remaining debris. The cooking pot, a length of rope, snagged on a nearby sapling, the cold stones I'd rearranged. I piled them neatly outside the clearing. If a rescue party stumbled here later, they'd know someone had passed through, but they would press onward following the stronger living trail mine. I took one last look at the ring of stones and embers. Then I shouldered my pack and turned north following the phantom footprints. The undergrowth grew thicker, but I forced myself to walk steadily, steps measured and deliberate. Doubt pricked at my mind, but I banished it with each exhale. The ridge's triumph still burned within me. Signal fire reflective panel, vantage point. Those tools remained intact, and I knew how to use them. The footprints led me to a narrow corridor of overgrown ferns that collapsed under my weight, and beyond the ground fell away into a shallow valley. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the canopy, and a faint path of trampled foliage suggested frequent passage. I followed it, heart pounding with anticipation, tinged by caution. After what felt like an eternity, the corridor opened onto a sloping hillside, strewn with granite boulders. Above, I glimpsed jagged rocks pointing skyward. This must be the same ridge I'd conquered earlier, but on a lesser-used approach. The path slanted upward. History repeated itself here. My legs shook, but I climbed. By the time I broke through the final line of branches, panting and coated in sweat and grime, the ridge lay before me once more. I paused at its foot, surveying the horizon. No distant plumes, but a record of my own signals remained a glint of metal from the panel, the faint wisp of smoke ghosting upward, and the reflective decals on the boulder I'd placed days ago. Aid might soon arrive, guided by those marks. I reached into my pocket, touching the serrated edge of the salvaged knife proof that someone else had tried and failed, but that I pressed on. I exhaled, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. I turned toward the next outcropping, determined to light another signal fire at first light and continue calling to the sky. Even in this false dawn, I had learned hope must be tempered by action. I would not pause for abandoned ghosts. I would press forward until I met a living rescue. And so I began climbing again, leaving behind a rekindled flame and taking with me the granola bars and newfound resolve. The ridge's crest loomed above me like a promise. Each step felt lighter now, though my body still throbbed, my spirit pulsed anew. I left the narrow gully behind, boots crunching on gravel and scattered pine needles that somehow thrived here. The granite underfoot was firm, each footfall echoing my resolve. At the top I paused, chest rising and falling in measured breaths, and surveyed the jungle's rolling canopy below. From this vantage, the world stretched in all directions, a mosaic of jade and emerald unbroken, except where my signals punctuated the scene. I knelt beside the metal panel, now dulled by days of rain and mud. It reflected the sun in a bright arc when I tilted it. Beside it lay the reflective decals still glinting on the stone face I'd chosen. I touched the panel's edge, feeling its cool solidity. This would be my final push, an unmissable heliograph message, timed to passing aircraft schedules I'd gleaned from the pilot's rough log in the wreck. The crash had disrupted radio contact, but this patchwork log listed estimated flight paths and search windows. The next convoy would cross here within hours. I retrieved the pilot's log from a waterproof pouch in my pack. Its pages mud-smeared, but legible detailed coordinates and times. I scanned the entries, finger tracing scrawled notes: 10:00 a.m. over Sector Bravo, 14:30 return flight corridor, 17:45 supply drop aerial path. The current time, gauged by the sun's angle, hovered near 13:30. I had a little over an hour to prepare before the afternoon searchers flew overhead. Hope surged through me, cold and fierce. I organized my gear: the metal panel, decals, spare rope, and flint. I needed nothing extraneous. I set the panel on its tripod of stones, its reflective surface angled just so. The decals, once peeled, had become dull in color, still enough to catch stray light. I pressed them along the panel's top edge, spacing them evenly, like signal flags. Next, I gathered tinder and kindling from the ridge's sparse brush, parched needles, brittle bark flakes, and thin twigs. The wind up here was stronger, whipping around the outcrop. I fashioned a small windbreak of rocks to protect the tinder pile. With flint in hand, I struck sparks onto dry leaf fragments. They caught quickly in the gusts, illuminated by errant sunlight. The flame danced, then stabilized into a slender column of smoke that rose defiantly above the wind-whipped treetops. Now for the timing. I sat cross-legged back against a boulder pilot's log in my lap. I oriented the compass needle to align with the flight path, heading 090 degrees eastbound. I practiced the heliograph motion cover expose, 20 repetitions per burst, followed by a longer pause. Morse code floated in my mind, SOS, that universal plea: 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes. I would signal continuously until noticed. The wind stripped away my doubts. Each rehearsal bolstered my confidence. My hands steadied, my breathing slowed, the rhythm internalized. I tested a quick set of flashes. The panel snapped sunlight into bright shafts, blinking against distant ridges. Satisfied, I saved energy by pausing, no rush, until 14:30. Between practice bursts, I drank water and nibbled a granola bar, drawing strength from its dense sweetness. My wounds still ached, but each bite reinvigorated me. I reapplied a small smear of antiseptic to the forearm cut, clean water and gauze in short supply, but cleanliness here mattered less than clarity of purpose. Time melted into focus. At 14:20, the sun sat high, its light powerful and unwavering. I extinguished the small flame. I could not risk alerting predators with smoke now. I gathered the embers in a pouch for later, then returned to my position, raising the panel once more. The decals shimmered, the reflective surface poised. At 14:30, I began. 3 short flashes, blink, blink, blink. 3 long exposures, hold, expose, hold each as still as possible, then 3 short again. The panel's face mirrored the sun into the jungle beyond commanding attention. I repeated the sequence tirelessly, muscles burning as I steadied my arms against the rocky tripod. Minutes felt like hours, but I counted them in precise intervals. 3-minute cycles of SOS signals timed for maximum visibility. Below the jungle canopy lay silent and vast. My heart fluttered with anticipation. Would they see me? Would the next beat of their rotors find my ordnance of light? At 1500, I paused, lowering the panel to rest blistered palms. I stared east haze, softening the horizon. A distant shape carved the sky, a wing, a blade, something moving. My pulse quickened. I flicked the panel upward, executing a final flurry of SOS flashes. Light speared through the air. The shape steadied, then disappeared behind a bank of clouds, only to emerge moments later, a dark silhouette against the sun's glare. A roar filled the air. A helicopter. My breath caught. I hammered out an unbroken series of rapid flashes, heart hammering in time. The silhouette pivoted, banking toward me. Tears blurred my vision as the rotor blade's thunder grew louder. I held the panel high until the craft hovered above the downdraft, rattling loose gravel around me. Relief, fierce and overwhelming, flooded through every muscle. The panel slipped from my grasp, clattering against the rocks. I dropped to my knees, face to the ground, letting the moment wash over me. My cries of thanks were lost in the wind, but I felt them all the same gratitude triumph release. The helicopter's shadow raced across the canopy, descending. I staggered to my feet, thrusting my arms into the air in a desperate wave. The aircraft settled on the ridge's narrow plateau, blades slowing as the pilot cut power. Dust and leaves whirled around me. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and let the reality sink in. Rescue had found me. The helicopter's rotors whipped the air into a frenzy, but my mind focused on one task: to build a fire so vast it could not be missed, to blaze a beacon that would shine through rain or fog. As the aircraft's shadow passed and the downdraft settled, I knelt by the scout fire circle I'd abandoned on earlier climbs. Its stones half buried, its embers cold. I cleared away ash and debris with trembling hands, then hunted the ridge for fuel: broken branches, dead stalks of bamboo, and the thick vines that hung like rope from the trees. Each armful weighed heavy as lead, but adrenaline lent me strength. I returned to the stone ring and laid down the largest pieces of wood as a base, forming a teepee of thick timbers bound at the top by braided vines scavenged from the wreck below. Between these supports, I wedged smaller sticks and twigs, creating layers of kindling that spiraled around a central core. I left breathing gaps to channel oxygen, envisioning flames roaring skyward. The rotor's echo receded, replaced by the rush of wind and my own labored breathing. Next, I retrieved the aluminum panel and reflective decals from my pack. Though battered, the panel still held shape. I positioned it at the edge of the fire ring, angled to catch sun and rotor touch its reflective surface, ready to signal ground crews. The decals I pressed along the panel's top and sides. They glimmered like emergency flags. Then I turned inward, gathering ignition sources, the ferrocerium rod, a handful of dry leaf fragments, and the oily soaked remnants of the helicopter's hydraulic fluid, stored in small canisters I'd stripped and stapled shut to prevent leaks. Even a few drops could accelerate flame. A distant click announced the helicopter's landing gear settling beyond the ridge. I heard shouted words, voices I could not decipher above the wind, and felt a surge of urgency. This was my window. I dropped to one knee, pulling the rod across its striker to create sparks. A smoldering ember caught in the leaf fragments. I cupped it and pressed it into the core of twigs. The flame flickered, then roared to life as I added more leaves. Heat blossomed instantly, and I layered on fine bamboo stalks, until the fire flared bright orange. I stood and fed larger logs into the blaze, the teepee structure igniting at multiple points. Flames surged upward, snapping and crackling hungrily, consuming vine bindings and gnarled roots. Smoke boiled from the base thick and black from the hydraulic oil residue. I grabbed a length of loose rope and draped it over a jutting boulder, the heat causing it to smolder and hiss, releasing acrid, dense smoke that rose in a cloud above the flames. Above me, the helicopter hovered its searchlight, sweeping the ridge. Below that, my fire burned like a furnace, its vortex of smoke a signal, a roaring cry carved in air. I raised my arms and shouted voice, raw but triumphant. The pilot banked the craft, pointing the searchlight directly at the inferno. The beam caught embers swirling like glowing insects. With the fire at its peak, I backed away to a safe distance, 3 meters where heat scorched my face. I grabbed 2 lengths of snapped rotor cable from my belt and threw them into the blaze. The metal glowed red as it twisted in the flames, releasing sparks that cascaded into the sky. My heart thundered. This conflagration could not be overlooked. The helicopter's searchlight pivoted toward me, and I saw movement at the edge of the fire's glow. Rescue personnel figures in bright orange flight suits descended the cargo net hanging from the aircraft's belly. Their footsteps crunched on the granite. Their voices crackled through radios. I waved my arms, stumbling forward as my boots slipped in the gravel. A strong hand grasped my shoulder, steadying me. "Are you okay?" A voice called, urgency tempered with relief. I could barely nod before a medic knelt, checking my pulse and inspecting my bandages. Flames danced behind them, and overhead the rotor's wash battled the smoke. "Hydrate him," another voice ordered. I was handed a canteen of water and drank greedily. The cold washed over my scorched lips, easing the fire in my throat. A rescuer produced a thermal blanket, wrapping it around my shoulders. I felt support on every side, hands lifting my pack, others securing the fire perimeter. The helicopter's crew snapped off lengths of cable to tether a rescue basket. The straps clinked as they swung into position. My legs wobbled, but they guided me onto the skids. The basket held me firmly, its harness cinched tight across my chest. Above the pilot re-engaged the rotor's power. The helicopter lifted the blaze, falling away beneath me, shrinking to a globe of furious light. I watched the fire consume the ridge, my creation, my salvation. Below, the jungle canopy receded. Above, the sky opened in a canvas of blues. A medic handed me oxygen. A whistle cut through the wind, and I closed my eyes, tears mingling with sweat and soot. My journey through fear and fire had brought me here aloft toward safety. As the helicopter banked toward fresh air, I felt the final anchor of isolation drop away. Flames still flickered behind me, but they were no longer my burden. They were a monument to endurance. Warmed by the helicopter's interior glow and the hum of its engines, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The rescue basket's straps tightened as the craft climbed, and I pressed my palm to the metal wall, feeling vibrations against my bandaged ribs. Below, the rainforest blurred into a quilt of green. Ahead, the world beyond these trees. Medical care, safety, human voices awaited. My heart pounded with relief, but also with a quiet wonder. I had walked every step of this journey with broken bones and bleeding flesh, yet I stood alive, carried aloft by hope. The medic checked my vitals through the harness's opening. "You're stable," she said softly. I managed a weak smile, pressing a thumbs up. My vision trembled with tears, tears of gratitude for the hands that pulled me from the abyss and of awe for my own will that had refused to yield. Every cut, every stitch of makeshift bandage, every improvised tool had led to this moment under the sky's vast cathedral. Through the open door, I glimpsed the pilot's silhouette backlit against the cockpit's instrumentation. His eyes flicked to me, a nod exchanged soldier to survivor, acknowledging the silent bond forged in peril. The rotors whipped harder, lifting us away from the ridge's edge, where my final beacon still smoldered like a living thing. I pictured the orange-clad rescuers extinguishing the blaze, marking the spot where survival had triumphed. I closed my eyes and drifted into memory, the crack of the crash, the sting of rain, the hiss of snakes, the roar of storms, the hush of stars overhead. Each pain and fear had been a note in an unyielding symphony of survival. Now, as we ascended towards civilization, the cacophony of the jungle gave way to the steady drone of engines and the rush of conditioned air. A rescuer draped a thermal blanket around me, its silver surface gleaming like starlight. I hugged it close, savoring warmth that went deeper than skin. The medic offered water through a straw. I sipped gratefully, each drop a testament to resilience. My pack lay secured behind the seat, full of memories, maps, scraps of metal, and evidence of a journey no rescue plan could fully prepare for. The pilot banked smoothly, and the valley opened to reveal a ribbon of river winding toward distant mountains. I followed its path with glassy eyes, thinking of the stream I'd found on day one, my lifeline through fear and pain. The river here seemed gentle and inviting. Below, I could almost hear its murmur, a softer echo of the roar that had first startled me. A gentle click signaled the pilot disconnecting the basket straps. I eased back, rubbing sore shoulders, and met the medic's compassionate gaze. Without words, she handed me a dry bandage pack and a bottle of antiseptic. In the moment before I could protest, she whispered, "Keep going. You've come this far." I nodded, voice catching, as I swallowed. The helicopter banked again, heading toward a clearing where a rescue convoy waited. Through the open door, I saw several figures in bright jackets, paramedics, commandos, and local guides waving as we approached. Their smiles were broad tears in their eyes. My stomach fluttered as I realized I would soon step onto solid ground, into arms that would carry me further than any vine or rotor blade ever could. I took a steady breath, bracing myself against the floor. The pilot eased the craft down, and the skids sank into soft earth. The cargo net dropped, and I climbed out, limbs unsteady but resolute. One by one, hands reached for me, steadying, comforting, guiding. My perspective shifted, forest canopy now behind me, human silhouettes ahead, safety and warmth enveloping my chilled body. As I walked toward the waiting medical team, crutches provided support where nature had once been my ally. Reporters' smiles and questions tucked away gave me space, recognizing the rawness of survival. I allowed the commandos to guide me to a waiting vehicle, an ATV with padded seats. The engine rumbled to life, and I settled in, letting the movement soothe my battered frame. My journey had begun with a violent crash, a fall into chaos. It had endured rainstorms that washed away strength, predators that tested instinct, isolation that challenged mind and soul, and hunger that stripped me to my core. But through it all, I had found ingenuity in wreckage, refuge in canopy boughs, sustenance in strange fruits, courage in the face of darkness, and resolve in the simple act of breathing. The ATV bounced along a rough path toward the base camp, but each jolt felt less punishing than staying behind. Around me, voices spoke of evacuation routes and medical checks, but their words drifted in a comforting murmur. My mind replayed the milestones: first jump from wreckage, makeshift surgery, by twisted metal, first fire in the trees, lookout on the ridge, and final blaze that could not be ignored. As we neared the camp, a field doctor gestured me toward a tent with blinking lights. Triage and care awaited. I hesitated a moment, then rose on shaking legs, letting every helping hand guide me forward. I took one last look back toward the towering jungle and the ridge where I had marooned myself. The forest loomed untamed, eternal, but this chapter was over. Kicking off my boots, I stepped into the tent. Warmth, voices, medicine. The world enveloped me in its embrace. I closed my eyes, a gentle smile curling across my lips. I had survived the rainforest's most brutal lessons and emerged not just alive, but unbroken. The tempest of my journey now recedes into memory, its echoes softened by the steady rhythms of supportive hands and healing warmth. Each step away from the jungle's embrace felt like shedding an old skin, brittle, torn, but essential to survival. The tent's soft glow cocooned me, the gentle hum of medical equipment, a lullaby, and the careful murmur of caregivers, a reassurance that I was no longer alone. Breathing slowed, I let my pulse settle into calm. The scent of antiseptic mingled with fresh linens. My senses sharpened to the simple comfort of life sustained. Beneath the blanket's gentle weight, I felt my heart quiet its frantic pace. Memories of rain-lashed leaves and predator growls drifted like distant dreams, their edges softened by time and healing. I thought of the rivulets that had guided me to water the shards of wreckage repurposed into tools, and the firelight dancing in the trees, symbols of ingenuity and will. These images, once vivid with fear, now twined together into a tapestry of triumph. Pain remained, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it was a marker of endurance, proof that I could rise from ruin. Outside, dusk settled over the camp lanterns, glowing like fireflies in twilight. A gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and pine, transforming the air into a promise of renewal. I closed my eyes and let a smile drift across my lips, each breath a soft whisper of gratitude. Soft footsteps approached, and a voice murmured, "Rest now." I nodded, feeling warmth spread through me like dawn's first light. The jungle's roar had faded, replaced by the comforting hush of human care. As sleep beckoned, I carried within me the knowledge that even in the deepest darkness, hope can kindle a blaze. And now, cradled in a world of compassion and calm, I drifted into sleep, safe, restored, and forever changed by the wild journey that led me home.